What is the logic behind terror attacks such as the one which occurred in the early hours of New Year's Day, when a Muslim man plowed his truck into people in New Orleans, killing 15 and wounding dozens? The same thing actually happened a few days earlier. On December 20th, Talib Abdul Mohsen, a Muslim man from Saudi Arabia, with a long history of pretending to be a critic of Islam and a convert to Christianity, etc., plowed his vehicle through a crowded Christmas market in Germany, killing 5 and injuring about 200 people. Both of these attacks, the media and officials were and are at a loss to establishing motive, other than telling us the usual, that the men were suffering from mental psychiatric disorders, that they had grievances, that they had personal problems in their lives, and so on and so forth. Yet the motive, which, as we shall see, does seem erratic and counterintuitive, was spelled out exactly 1 year ago today, and as such is worth revisiting. On January 3rd, 2024, the Islamic State, ISIS, issued a statement making seemingly strange and bizarre assertions. For starters, the terror group took responsibility for bombing Israel's archenemy, Iran, and killing about 100 people in Kerman. It also told Muslims that although Israel and Jews are indeed the chief and arch enemies of Islam, and although Muslims were then irate at what was happening in Palestine, now is not the time to fight Israel. As to what Muslims should do, ISIS urged them to randomly kill people in the West. From here, it is of course easy to see why some accuse the terror group of being created by the CIA, Mossad, etc. And yet, and here's the interesting part, everything ISIS said was indeed connected to Islamic teaching and law. First, they attacked Iran because as a Shia nation, not only is it not Muslim, and therefore an infidel enemy like the rest, but it's something of a wolf in sheep's clothing. To the average Sunni Muslim, it seems Islamic enough, and it seemingly champions Islamic causes such as the Palestinians vis-a-vis Israel, etc. In reality, ISIS argues that Iran is no less of an enemy than so-called Jews or Crusaders in the statement, that they have the same nefarious plots, etc., etc. Second, in its statement, ISIS counseled Muslims not to fight Israel because the primary beneficiary would be the Palestinian Authority, the PA, which, because it does not enforce Sharia, is no less an infidel than Israel. And what's the point of toppling one infidel power, Israel, only to replace it by another? Let me read you a quote from the statement. The battle with the Jews is a religious one, and not a nationalist or populist one. It is not a battle for land, soil, or borders. A Muslim fights the Jews because they have committed kufr, disbelief, against Allah Almighty. The purpose of battle is to impose tawheed for Allah and upholding His word. This purpose has been absent from the latest battle in Gaza. ISIS even went on to mock the concept of Palestinian liberation. They wrote, "This interpretation of liberation itself requires liberation. Liberating a land does not mean to free it from one secular government in favor of a democratic one. And it does not mean releasing it from a Jewish constitution only to be governed by a Palestinian constitution. For the laws that govern Palestine and the Jewish statelet are one. They are man-made, and all such governments are alike to Almighty Allah. They're bad. A land not ruled by Islamic Sharia is not liberated, even if all the Jews and invaders leave it. In fact, it is still a captive of kufr laws. Kufr meaning non-Muslim, infidel, etc., etc." All right. Finally, in returning to recent events, plowing vehicles into and killing people in the West, this too, of course, was ISIS's idea and its counsel to its followers, as actually reflected in the very title of the statement that it issued. The title was, "Kill them wherever you find them." And this is a paraphrase of Koran 9:5, which in Islamic jurisprudence is known as the verse of the sword. And in that scripture, Allah calls on the believers, the Muslims, to kill the mushrikeen wherever you find them, capture them, besiege them, lie in wait for them in every way, and kill them. Mushrikeen is Arabic for essentially the polytheists, pagans, idolaters, which is an umbrella term for essentially all non-Muslims, including Christians. Because of the Trinity, they're seen as polytheists in this sense. At any rate, in keeping with that mandate of Quran 9:5, ISIS urged Muslims to, let me read you the quote in the statement. It urged Muslims to chase your praise, whether Jewish, Christian, or their allies, on the streets and roads of America, Europe, and the world. Break into their homes, kill them, steal their peace of mind by any means you can lay hands on. Detonate explosives, burn them with grenades and fiery agents, shoot them with bullets, cut their throats with sharp knives, and run them over with vehicles. Come at them from every door, kill them by the worst of means, turn their gatherings and celebrations, such as New Year's Day, into bloody massacres. Do not distinguish between a civilian, kafir, infidel, and a military one, for they are all kuffar, infidels, and the ruling against them is one and the same, meaning they all should be killed according to Koran 9:5. So, such is the seeming caprice and nihilism of Islamic terrorism. It knows no bounds and can strike at any time and any place, without, at least in the eyes of so-called infidels, rhyme or reason, as evidenced by all the random terror attacks to plague Western cities in recent years, if you've been paying attention. And a great many of these have consisted specifically of Muslims plowing their vehicles into non-Muslims, the most notorious of which probably occurred in Nice in France in 2016, when a Muslim man drove a big rig truck over people celebrating Bastille Day, killing 87 of them and wounding 437. So there it is, some context as to what propelled the New Orleans massacre with which New Year's opened with.